You're just in time. Well, thank you to Jim Kelly, who's not able to be here today. She's not feeling well. Natalie and Bianca, who are in the office right now, have been taking care of us. There's Bianca behind you now. They have been taking care of all of the logistical things and seeing that you have, some of you have water, which is fantastic. Also, I was not at all sure even whether or not it was desirable to go ahead with what's going on here today in view of everything else that's going on at the moment. And I felt a certain division of concerns, to say the least. But I have been hearing things that suggest that this is redemptive in some way. I hope so. I hope so. There have been a lot of questions about the titles in this exhibition. Where did they come from? One or two of them came from me, but the rest of them did not. And I have tried very hard to keep track of who the different writers and poets are and have been that I get inspiration among any number. So I'm going to read off that list and then we'll have that behind us. One is James Joyce, particularly Ulysses, a portrait of the artist as a young man. Most especially Ernest Hemingway, For Whom the Bell Tolls. And this title is not taken from Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, the title of the show. This comes from the Nobel Prize winner Czesław Miłosz. I'm a great fan of his, and also Madame Zimborska, who was another Nobel Prize winner from Poland, who was a poet as well. Very great inspiration. Another writer, Kobo Abe, particularly Woman in the Dunes, that book and the film as well. And my all-time favorite film. Great influence on my life and my work. His director in the film, Teshika Hara, also deserves a lot of credit as far as I'm concerned, particularly for Woman in the Dunes and The Face of Another. Those two films. They have directly influenced what informs my work, no doubt about it. I'm not sure what my work would look like if that hadn't been possible, if they hadn't been there. E.E. Cummings, whose work is so beautiful, has fallen into disfavor. It's an unfortunate thing, but he wrote very great poems, particularly love poems, and I think they were wonderful. Another, Alberto Moravia, the author, the writer, particularly The Empty Canvas, and another book that was a great influence to me from the age of 12 on, and still. He wrote a book called Two Adolescents, that one. And a contemporary, well, she's not contemporary, she's passed on recently, in my view recently, Marguerite Dumas, who wrote a book called The Lover, and it was made into a film, and I highly recommend it, a beautiful thing, and lots of disagreement about what was going on in that film. So I like that too, although I'm right and everybody else is wrong. There are filmmakers who have influenced my work a lot. One is Kurosawa. I have a history with that. When I was younger and at the Art Students League, a mentor of mine was Yasuo Kuniyoshi. And when the film first started playing, one of the places it first started to play in was Woodstock, New York, of course. And so we were all told that we should get up to the movie theater right away and pay our 15 cents and see the film. We sat on wooden benches and watched that, and it was a staggering influence on everybody. Now, I asked my students, there are people who are enrolled in my class at the Art Students League these days, if they had any questions. And one person, I'm not sure if I see him here. I don't think he's here, or I would have heard something by now. Was asking me who my favorite artist is and who were. And just to get clear about this, to start, in the past it's Goya. Because Goya is very different than this, ostensibly. Really different. If Goya thought it needed to be pictorialized as well as become great art, he did that. His sense of beauty rested entirely with somebody just walked in who always comes in that way. Yeah. This is the person who provides me with books about Einstein and Marlene Dietrich. Nice to see you. Well, the greatest influence apart from Goya, or contemporary artists that I like, is an influence on my thinking in terms of a challenge. That's Anselm Kiefer. Kiefer is able to get himself expressed and pour it all out on canvas, and in a way that is unimaginable for me. I've tried it a few times, and it's a colossal disaster, whatever it is that comes out. But he's able to do that. He's able to get it up on the canvas or create an installation. And those canvases and installations are so powerful to me, and so inaccessible to my being able to do anything like that the last time I saw an exhibition of Kiefer's was almost the last exhibition I ever saw in a gallery. I was so overwhelmed I almost couldn't breathe, and I had to go outside the gallery, miss the rest of the show, and try to catch my breath. It was absolutely staggering. Now, from the past, it's easier. The great influence is Piero della Francesca. I cut my teeth on Piero della Francesca by accident. At the time, I didn't realize that he had the degree of popularity among contemporary painters that he had and that he continues to have. And I wandered as a teenager into the chapel at Arezzo, and it was overwhelming, and I never got over it. And I keep going back to Piero all the time to get an eyeful of what is possible for some human being to create. Another artist is the ukiyo-e artist, Utamaro. My work, while ostensibly not noticeable, I guess, has a lot to do with what Utamaro's work had to do with. My earlier work was more, what it was about was more noticeable. The third large show that I had in New York back a long time ago, the title of that show was Women, and Uttamaro was about women, and there's no way out of this. That informs what's here somehow. But more about that later. And another artist that I think created the greatest painting that ever got painted. And I have no way of putting it up on the screen for you, so if you haven't seen it, go look for it. There was a 13th century Sung Dynasty painter named Mucci. And he painted somehow a painting that has been called, it is now regarded as 6 Persimmons. And I see that painting as the hallmark of everything that's possible for an artist to be able to get out of themselves and get as much as possible by saying as little as possible, which for me is an incredible ideal. I come out of a home where my mother had posted something that she wrote down and framed, had hanging on the wall, so I could see it every day. It said, "Don't talk unless you can improve the silence." And here I am. I can't even imagine how she would have thought about all this. Now, as I go along during this time frame, if something comes up which seems impossible to stay silent about it, don't. I won't have anybody come and take you out of the room. I won't even try. Just raise your hand, and I'll try to notice it. If I don't notice it, somebody will notice it, and we'll get to that as quickly as possible. Places, everybody's here. I mean, this is amazing. Well, there was an interview, one of several, taken by the lead historian and archivist who's here today, Stephanie Cassidy. She did an interview which now is accessible on YouTube. No, you didn't do that interview. Somebody else did that. She did an interview with different instructors at the Art Students League, and there was one that she did with me. And then she did one which we're still waiting for the archives to do something about. There are ways of getting a hold of it, though. It's an 8.5-hour, uninterrupted, except for lunch, interview over several days, and she was amazing. It was really great. So if you've ever got 8.5 hours, all at once or at different times in your life, somehow this will get to you someday, and if it doesn't look like it's going to, there are ways to accomplish that if you let me know. Don't let Stephanie Cassidy know, because it's going to put her in a tough spot. But not me. I'm okay. I have never been concerned about unemployment. I've lived my whole life unemployed. So that's and it's okay. It really is. Well, I've had some part-time employment. Nothing really serious. There are questions about the exhibition itself. What goes on here? And I suppose, here, the guy that's responsible for asking about my favorite artist has just arrived. And the question is always problematic. Kiefer himself has made himself problematic, and that's one of the things that's endearing about him, I suppose. This is a guy who, before he was known, he got up in the middle of Germany, I guess it was in Berlin. I don't know. I'm not sure if it was Berlin or some other city. And he donned a uniform from the Second War, and got up in the square and gave a salute. That's kind of a salute. And he hot. Yeah, well, you said it. That's what he did. I know. Well, he called a great deal of attention to himself, and then he somehow managed to, over a period of time, explain what it was that he was doing in order to get people to get to his art and so forth. And it was a sort of cynical comment. I don't know about that. But like other people, like Wei Wei, who was a student of mine, and Bob Dylan, who was a close friend and also a sort of amateur student of mine, they know how to get attention, and so does Kiefer. The Wei Wei thing is very interesting, by the way. I think you should know about this. The Art Students League holds him up as a hero, as a sort of graduate. They don't graduate people, really, but they hold him up as an example of what can come out of the Art Students League. He did come out of the Art Students League. He was kicked out. But the Art Students League doesn't talk about that. But he was taken out by people who had been in touch with, that the League had been in touch with at the State Department at that time, and then they came and got him. Now, Wei Wei, I see my historian is rolling her eyes. I'm okay. I'm fine. The problem with Wei Wei, and the problem turned into an asset temperamentally. Wei Wei would be up all night at that age. Maybe he still is. But certainly at that time when he was in New York, he had a camera, and he'd spend the whole night going around New York taking pictures. And by the time it got to be 6 o'clock in the morning, he was absolutely exhausted. I mean, the guy was collapsed. But one of the things that I love about the Art Students League is the artists who teach there, in principle, the artists who teach there can figure out what's going on with their particular students if they care about that. And whatever's necessary to assist the development and creation of their art, that's what should happen. So with me, I had a morning class. So in comes Wei Wei. We had a table for him right near the door, and he'd get on and go to sleep. And I was okay with that because I felt that that was a necessary part of what had to be done in order for him to be able to create. But there were other people in the administration who didn't feel that way, and so as he indicates in his book, in his biography from a couple of years ago that's now in print, he talks about that. He doesn't go on and on about it, but he mentions it. He becomes very diplomatic at that point. So, there's that, about some of what informs all of this. Now, another question that was asked was, how come the work looks like this? Well, I understand that in the world of academia, there is a distinction that's made between abstraction and otherwise. And usually is the otherwise is realism or representational work. Well, my work until the early 70s, my work was largely figurative work of a sort that used the images of women. But I was doing it in a way so that it was other. There was a lot of open space, and there was color only deposited in the space where the woman was. If you want to see those things, you have to go on the internet and dig around, and you can find them. I mean, they're there. They're in collections. They're around. Most of it's public too, so you can find them. Okay. That distinction between abstraction and otherwise is, in my view, is artificial. By the way, if I don't say it, you'll know that what I mean every time I say something is, it seems to me. That's very important. I am a graduate of the University of Iowa, not from the art department. And the department that I came out of said it's a good idea to preface everything with, it seems to me. Right? It seems to me that anything that happens is an abstraction of some sort. There's no way out of it. I mean, you see something, it has to go through something, it's informed by something, it's affected by something, and it's not the other thing. So it's abstract. So there's a degree of abstraction that's involved with everything. And I noticed that those aspects of my figurative work that were being paid attention to, both positively and sometimes negatively, and sometimes quizzically, had to do with the impact of and relationship to Piero della Francesca. That is, treating the subject matter as an excuse for making painting. So, Della Francesca is the visit of the Queen of Sheba, the crucifixion, and so forth. And they become paintings, no matter what. If you have no idea what's going on with the imagery, you can see the painting. The art is there. It's evident. You can see the relationship of red to blue and shape to shape and all of that. He made that possible. So the painting has to exist in terms of the choice of relationships that are there. And it struck me that at a certain point in time, a while back, that what I was doing really was that. I was placing color next to color and shape next to shape and creating an overall space that then hopefully was evocative of something, hopefully, or many things that I had in mind or being bothered about, whatever it was. So in the spirit of something, I'm not sure, I don't know yet, I decided that should anything that interfered with that, what was really going on, should just be exempted. And it was possible to get what everything was about by just sticking to the choices and the preferences with respect to how things appear next to each other. That is, the relationships between things. That somehow painting has to do with the choices that are made with respect to how one proceeds to get involved with different kinds of relationships. So that's what happened here. I don't see any difference, but the differences are pointed out to me. Somebody will find some place in the painting and somebody's head, a foot, or something like that. You see? There it is. This is a problem. It comes up in various places that I've taught, particularly at the Art Students League, which has always stressed academic fundamentals, and I don't believe there are such things. I think what's fundamental is whatever you can find that's fundamental to that human being that they can understand and give expression to in a way that's reasonably clear. So, and it doesn't matter whether it's somebody's foot or head or a red shape or a blue shape. It is that finally, except that there's a different kind of filtering that goes on when referential stuff is not in the work. I also was influenced by an art history genius that I worked with at one point. I studied with, I didn't work with him, who is no longer. And he was the head of a department at the Smithsonian. He'd probably be fired now, like today. But this was a person named Roy Sieber. And Sieber used to remind people, this is what he would say. He said that for an artist, subject matter is an excuse for making art. That artists will find the subject matter that permits them to give expression to what they need to. That's what will happen. And it's not, there's a horse over there, so you should be able to paint it, even though you're strung with red, blue, and green. The horse is not red, blue, and green. Well, I had an interesting thing happen about that. When I first came to the Art Students League, I was teaching at the Art Students League in Woodstock. That's when they were there. And it was very different. People were camping out in the woods, behind buildings. Parents were coming, they were irate, where's my kid? They were blaming it on me. It was like that. And the model, when I first got to the league, all the classes at the league were called painting, drawing, and composition. And there was always this thing about fundamentals of drawing from the model. I never knew what the fundamentals were. I never knew what they were because I was a fan of Utamaro, and I was also a fan of Masaccio. And they didn't look like, the human beings in each of their works, these masterpieces, are different. So who's got the fundamentals right? Well, I think it's not really correct at all to assume that Masaccio had it right and Utamaro had it wrong. It's ridiculous. But this is what helps keep art schools in business. This kind of a notion. And fortunately, the Art Students League, there are different places that you can go to. You don't have to do this or you don't have to do that. You can make choices, which is very, very important. I mean, you can. They can also kick you out too. Except, in keeping with the times now, the league now has a human resources officer. And if you turn your head in the wrong direction, or if somebody from 20 years ago runs up and starts to hug you, you're liable to wind up in jail with a step in between in the human resources office. That's another big change in the art school. And in some respects, I suppose it's well deserved, but in others it becomes crazy. I've been noticing lately, for whatever reasons, that the people who come into my class, they do that, and they seem to feel safe doing it, which is upsetting. Anyway, so I see all of this as, all of art as functioning at different levels of abstraction, different levels of degrees of abstraction, more or less referential in character. But art doesn't require that in order for it to succeed as art. Everybody's got a song, they have to figure out how to sing it. Everybody can create a song, some people can get it sung and other people won't, for whatever reasons. But the singing is crucial. How that comes out is absolutely crucial. There used to be a guy across the street from the Art Students League years ago who was, I don't know what he was, but he was screaming in behalf of some religion or another, or his own religion or something. He was across the street, and he would scream Verdi and Puccini at the top of his lungs. And he'd run up to people, and they'd run away. And I don't know if you remember that at all. You do, yeah. And even though it was Verdi, the words were Verdi's words, and somehow remotely there was a masked ball or whatever the inclination seemed to be. It didn't work. It was just scaring everybody off the street. Well, perhaps there might be at this point a museum for that, where you can get scared out of your wits, and if it succeeds, you did it. However, there were so many people scared away that they complained. It became a public issue, and then he disappeared. And then he came back for a short time, and then he disappeared. He never came back again. I can't even imagine. If it was today, he would just disappear. He'd wind up, I don't know where. But in any case, the other thing that I want to offer you is this, about this issue of abstraction. I think the more successful academicians are about what they're doing, the more psychotic everybody becomes. The artist becomes more psychotic, the audience becomes more psychotic, and psychosis gets approved of. So for example, there is a book by a psychoanalyst named Ernst Christ, and it's called Psychoanalytic Explorations in Art. And that psychoanalytic psychiatrist, he spent a lot of time in several mental institutions talking about issues and problems and concerns that a number of people who were in institutions were involved with. And there was one particular person, it was in Austria, I can't remember which institution it was, but one of the people who was there was a sculptor, or somebody who made things, and his name was Hans Messerschmidt. And Hans Messerschmidt made heads, but he didn't know the difference. He thought he was making a head. And he was so terrific. If he was in an academic sculpture class, he'd be the star. Everybody would be thrilled. He would 6 red dots, hands down. But this was a psychiatric issue. He couldn't tell the difference between what he was creating and what was over there. And he really believed that what was over here was that. And this was his way of getting that over here. So there is something about all of this, not with figurative or representational painting in general, but in academic circles. There is a really serious problem, and people become addicted to this problem. It's incredible. It's a skill set, but that's what it is, and a questionable one in terms of what informs it. That thing over there, that person over there, grandma, what's on the canvas is not grandma. And that's sometimes not understood. It's not. It can't be, it never will be. No matter how hard you work at it, no matter how hard you are good at getting to it, that never goes away. They're different. This is an abstraction. That is also a different kind. So at least that's the view from here. No hands up? Well, listen, you know, my colleagues are still talking to me, most of them. We get along just fine. I don't know what they're thinking, but we're okay. Now, another thing, there is something with respect to the showing of work. You can't see it here, but some of these pieces can't be stood on the floor. They can't be stood on the floor because the bottom of the work doesn't conform to the level of the floor. And this is a complication because since the time of the Reformation in Europe, when people started to own paintings, they started to buy paintings and collect them, store them, and hang them on their walls and have paintings that change places. They had to be workable, they had to be doable. And artists knew this. They didn't know it at the time of the caves. They didn't know it until then, but with the Reformation, and I'm not a Reformation person, I'm not any of that. But with that development came capitalism and the ownership of things. And ownership became part of the virtue of that particular, going in that particular direction spiritually. It was a demonstration of something, so people began owning things, and artists fell into that. Fortunately, some of them successfully, like Rembrandt, for example, and Vermeer. It worked. It was a good space for them. But from the caves until that time, from the caves until then, it wasn't that. And since, I don't know, since the late, since the early 1900s, paintings have begun to be what they need to be. And you may notice that some of these pieces of work extend outside the ordinary perimeters of the paintings, and some of my work that's not here, there's no straight lines involved at all, externally, not at all. Now, what I've done is I invented a system so that I wouldn't be called for any practical reasons, out of the sake of convenience on the part of my very understanding gallery or whoever was hanging the work, or wherever it was going. But it has sometimes represented a curiosity that has turned into a problem, but it's always been solvable. And that is, there are bolts that drop down out of the bottom of the painting that then can be tightened so that the painting can be stood up and everything is clear. There's clearance from anything underneath. So it turns out it's okay. It was suggested to me at one time that if I got a patent on this thing, I'd become a millionaire. somehow, you know, it didn't take very much time for me to decide that that wasn't really what I wanted to spend my time with. So also, there's another thing that I think I think is a big problem for a lot of artists, and I understand it because it comes up all the time, and all of these pieces in process have this happen at times. It's something that I had a psychiatrist in my class at one time. She was impossible. She never stopped talking. It was just incredible, and she had more problems than anybody in the room. It's just amazing. But anyway, I invented something. I think I invented it called dilemma disorder. Whether I should do this or I should do that. Should I go this way or should I go that way? Should I turn it this way? This is something that I think the American Psychiatric Association would be interested in, this dilemma disorder. Now, you have to know also that I didn't take a degree in art. I set out to take a degree in art. I went to a very fine place and was very well spoken for. I was, the place was, and everything. There were artists teaching there that I knew, and so on. And they said, why do you want to spend all of your money getting a degree in art when you're going to do this anyway? There's the rest of this place. There's all sorts of things going on. So I left the art department with their blessing, and I went over to the Department of Social Psychology. This is the University of Iowa, mind you. And they were curious about all of this. And what my studies were about, I was painting at night. I was painting every night. But what was going on in this other department was I was working on papers that had to do with personality disorders and nonverbal communication. That has really saved my life. I have to tell you, with all due respect for those of you who have been students of mine, who are students of mine, who happen to be here, or if you know somebody who was, that was a lifesaver for me. It made a lot possible, including the psychiatrist. And she was the one who said I should deliver this thing at the American Psychiatric Association as a paper of some sort. An honest to God syndrome of some sort. Anyway, are there any questions at this point? Yes? All right. Okay. So, well, the dilemma disorder thing, I think it's in a way it's fun, but it's not about fun. But I think it gets into everything. It really does. And there's somebody working with me now who helps me a lot. I think she's here. She has an official role. I don't know, I'm not sure if did she leave? it's Nina?
I'm here.
Oh, you're there? Yeah. Well, this is another thing. It's a very popular thing among artists, never you mind students, to express that I don't think. I don't think. And somehow this is encouraged, not to think. Just let it out. Let it. This is impossible. It is just impossible. I mean, how did you even get to know that you don't think? It just the whole thing is crazy. But I had this one episode that really did it, that I mentioned to some of my students. I didn't know the argument got to be so impossible, and the non-thinkers were so insistent. They're in love with the idea of no thinking. This is interesting because even we have two cats. And you're doing something. They're making choices, usually not to eat. And there's something going on there. There is. So I was guest teaching some artists across the river at one point, and he's a very good painter working on something. And I happened to ask, how did you happen to choose that particular red and that particular blue? I don't know. I didn't think about it. I just felt it and did it. Okay, so that interested me. I mean, I could have let it go at that, and I think that would have been the right thing to do, just let it go. Well, I can't. It's very hard for me to just let it go. So I said, how is that possible? How is it possible? You put red there, and you put blue there, and you pick the brush, and you know, there's all this stuff that goes on. You're putting it on a canvas. How did this all happen? What happened? And she said, well, I didn't think about it. So I said, that's impossible. And she said, it is possible. And I said, you know, there was only one time I ever heard anything that almost convinced me. And she said to me, I'll tell you how it's possible. What's that? She said, that's how I found my husband. That was the end. No more discussion. That. And then of course, you know, there are a lot of cross-cultural things that happen that are, you know, absolutely fascinating and remarkable and incredible. And but there's an inclination oftentimes to ignore all of that in behalf of some particular universal standard for everything that usually is something that comes out of the Middle Renaissance in Italy, which is still receiving wide application all over the place, even at the Art Students League in a lot of it. And the whole world is not the 15th century in Italy. It is not. And it's very, very hard, I think, for a lot of painters, never mind who they work with, to fall into that. That somehow, if you can get that right, you can get anything else right. Well, you tell that to Utamaro or Mucci, these two very great painters, and you know, if they were around, and you could ask them and see where it gets you. It would be absolutely no place. But there is this thing, and it's just it's really terrible. It's unfortunate. Okay. Any questions so far about this? Really? So there's another thing. Sometimes. Oh yes, good.
Mr. Dorfman, have you thought about a cure for the dilemma disorder? Like, what is that?
Well, it's a yeah. That is, choose and accept the risk that's involved in making the choice. Well, it's a yeah. That is, choose and accept the risk that's involved in making the choice, because you know that assumes that you'll still be here 5 minutes from now or 5 days from now to change that if that's necessary, if you feel that's necessary. But there is a risk involved in making choices, and artists like Rembrandt or Pollock or Mucci or whoever, they accept that risk. And sometimes there's a heavy penalty for that because it shows them the work. And when that risk is very evident in work at the time, it can be a really big problem. You know, because that's not the way things are done. Those are not the kind of choices that should be made. These other, you know, it's the choices that I would make and so forth, that kind of thing. But that's the only way out that I know of. There are other ways out. I mean, I was a younger part at that time of a generation of artists that drank themselves to death if they weren't sticking them into their arms and killing themselves that way, or something of the sort. To be able to deal with all of this once they, sometimes in the studio, but usually out of the studio, when they carry these life in the studio and try to get it outside the studio, it isn't that. It's a different universe in a lot of ways. So, I don't know if that is. Another thing that happens is there's an issue. You know, I need to express myself. What do you do? I mean, whatever you do, even if you decide to try not to, that you're doing it. Whatever it is, it's an expression of yourself. I don't understand the effort to try to get at that. I think what's the issue, and it was not an issue for me, and it still is not, is the validity of choice. That what you're doing as a human being, unless it's somehow an imposition that's damaging or hurting in any way anybody or anything else, that somehow it is not intended as an imposition, and it's there if anybody wants to be a spectator to it or be involved with it, but they don't have to be. That's not necessary. A great hero of mine is the Russian composer Shostakovich, who spent his life with Stalin in office. And somehow he survived it. He survived the whole thing. And he did it by sticking to what he needed to stick to. And there were enough people who were around at that time who were warning Stalin, you know, there's somebody creating great music here. This is not somebody who's simply performing something. This is a person who's creating something here. And, you know, it's just altogether possible that you shouldn't send him out to the gulag. So he made it. It had a lot to do with it. He capitulated at certain times in certain ways, but it was always, the excuses, it was always in behalf of being able to continue to compose. Now, sometimes when I'm working, and I have to do all of these pieces of work, I manage to do things that when I see what I've done, it's awful. I mean, it's just horrible. And you know, I know it. And you know, and I always take that opportunity to sit down and try to remember that I don't necessarily have to like it, and I didn't have to enjoy doing it. It's what's there, and that's it. It's what's there. Not to go looking for some other aspect of having done it or what it looks like, but does it work? Does what's there work? What's right in front of me, does that work? Not something else that I might have had in mind. That's very, very important. There are a lot of artists who are absolutely dumbstruck and upset and incapacitated sometimes, and having to struggle to find ways out, who don't understand why they're not enjoying what they're doing, and they might not like what they've done. But you know, I've never met a happy artist. I've known a lot of artists. I never met one that was really happy. And you know, the only time that there was, you know, Pollock. When was Pollock ever? Or any of them? Any of them? I don't think. Well, even who tomorrow was put in jail. Imagine that. At that time, in Japan, not because of the art, but because they had questions about his subject matter. And his subject matter, I mean, looking at it 5 years after he's gone, there's no plot. But you know, it was people who were looking, including some artists who are looking for something instead of looking at what's right in front of them. That's really important. And I get to that a lot. I see something going on, I don't know how in the world, but there it is. And sometimes with a walk around the block and a cup of coffee, trying to calm down, yeah, maybe there's something to that, and then I decide, okay, there is something to it, take a risk and go on, use it. So that's an interesting thing. And sometimes, and it's in some of these pieces, there are, the paint, or whatever it is delivered onto the canvas in a way that is not predictable. So the delivery of that unpredictability is informed by everything up till that moment. So one does what one can, or is able to, or is informed by at that time, understanding that it may not work. It may not, but it may. And if it does, wow, that's fantastic. And I'm sure that historically, from the caves onward, this has been a common experience that artists have been willing to have. That, running that particular risk. That's very, very important. Now, another thing is I have always heard, without the words being used usually, except when it's some, forgive me, Natalie, but not this gallery. But there are some entrepreneurs in brick and mortar places and some museums and so forth. They'll ask, well, why did you do that, or why did you do that? And, you know, well, why didn't you do that, or something else? And you can. It's something you can do, but that involves the performance of something. And this is not a matter of performance. And you know, I have to get myself past that any number of times in the course of doing these things. It's not a performance, it's a creation. It wasn't there before. It wasn't there before. It was similar in some ways to other things that have been there before, that are being now, but as an entity, it wasn't there before. So to some degree, it's unfamiliar, and what it takes to get this may be a little bit other, or very much other, than what it took just prior to that time. That is a very complicated and hard thing, especially if there's an entrepreneur behind you who's saying, I wish you'd use blue instead of, I don't know what it is. Their favorite color that they don't want is usually black, or I don't know, some dark thing that the buyers won't buy. I had a dealer once before I came here. This was years ago, Bianca. It's years ago, uptown, and the guy who owned the place, nice place. In all the time that I was with him, I never saw him inside my studio, except one time. The last time I showed with that place, he said, I'm going to come to your studio. At that time, I was working on, had been working on, had just completed the first of my Ulysses paintings, or James Joyce paintings. The name of the painting was Molly Bloom. Well, Molly Bloom is an interesting character. And you know, the last page of Ulysses is incredible. It's really an incredible inspiration for this painting, Molly Bloom. So that you can imagine this, you know, being that, there was a lot of green. And there was a lot of real green, and it was green interrupted by a very high red, right up the middle of the whole thing. So he came in the studio, and he looked around and he pointed at the green painting, the Molly Bloom painting, and he said, people don't buy green paintings. I don't want that painting in the show. So when the mover came to get the exhibition and bring it up to the gallery, I put that one in. And yeah, one of the people who was working at the gallery at the time, we had a kind of sympathy, and that person hung Molly Bloom. And when I went to the reception, he came over to me and he said, "We sold a painting." It's Molly Bloom. Yeah. Yeah. Well, but there's been one other green painting since that time. There's going to be another one soon. So there is all of that. Now, looking at here. Oh yes, and I think this is an interesting issue now, and we're all faced with it. Everybody who's painting or making art is faced with this issue. There are always market issues. You know, there are people writing. There are the fifth generation of Greenberg who are not him, and you know, Brian O'Doherty's gone, John Canada's gone. The people who are writing, they're gone. So there are these people who stop by sometimes if you're on their itinerary of galleries that you visit. So it's almost a full-time job trying to get that accomplished. It's doable, but it requires a tremendous amount of energy and an impossible nervous system to accomplish it. There's going to be one. I got notified. I did. It's somebody that I've known for 50 years. Yeah. Anyway, There's an issue that's around now, and it's one that I'm constantly aware of and hopefully successfully ignoring. It becomes increasingly difficult to ignore, and that is making a distinction between whatever it is that you mean by art and what it is that's artistic. There's a lot of artistic, and that's wonderful. However, there's this other thing, art, capital A, whatever that is. Now, I know what it is. That may be different than when you know it is, what you think it is or know it is, but nevertheless, I do make that distinction. And it seems to me that what it is that gets in front of you either fulfills its own terms, or there's stuff going on in it that is aimed at accessibility, no matter what, even if it means the loss of the art in order to get it. There are people, particularly in the performing arts, that have this happen all the time. So, you know, there's somebody like Maria Callas who's perfectly willing to shatter light bulbs and have the people in the place upset with her, or whatever the issue may happen to be. And such people like her as a performer, or Rembrandt, or Pollock, or whoever it is, Clifford Still, whoever it may be. By the way, we have already gone through Kiefer, so if you're waiting for that, you got here late. Yeah. I think that when art appears, that it is distinctive, and although it has some relationship to other things in this world, the closest relationship that it has to anything else in the world is who created it, not somebody else and something created by another person. Now, we may resemble it in some ways, we may be affected by it. The interaction between different kinds of impact can be very great. However, the distinction can be made. The differences are notable and they can be pointed at. That's very important. And those differences are put there in a way that, regardless of whether you like them or not, the artist meant that and did that. And you don't have to like it, you don't even have to keep looking at it, but the artist will do that. Artistic things are not like that. There are concessions that are made all through the doing of the work, and it shows. I think it does show. I'm not sure what that signifies, and I don't care. So, any questions so far? Any of this? Any violent or peaceful disagreements?
Do you ever dispose of any art?
Was they ever what?
Do you ever dispose of any of your art if it, from the years past?
Have I ever gotten rid of some?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
And I by and large, I regret it. I regret it. It was always for reasons that had nothing to do with the work itself.
Right.
There were personal reasons, and I just couldn't deal with it. But it was a mistake, and by temperament, it's one that I can make. Somebody apparently, I mean, according to pop media, an artist like Pollock, not Pollock, Picasso. If he did it, he did it. That's it. That's all that mattered. Didn't matter what. And then there's this other issue, which I think is very valuable, which he apparently really understood. That it's not the subject matter ultimately that's going to cause the work to survive. It's the art that drives that subject matter. That's it. I mean, there were other people at Goya's time that were concerned about what he was concerned about. But then he did what he did. And there's an artist who passed away not just quite recently, actually, who had a large solo exhibition of a series of drawings that were some of the most powerful, disturbing, upsetting, and message delivering work that I've ever seen. There's an artist named Mauricio Lazansky who did a cycle. He was a printmaker, a very important printmaker. when you get around printmakers, if you bring him up, then it will out. And there was a time not too long ago when printmaking was a big thing all over the world, and very much so in America and in New York. It was a big deal. And then people were aware of who people were that were making prints and so forth. There may be some sort of renaissance of this. The Art Students League is trying to do something about that. Maybe that will work out, I hope so. But anyway, Lazansky did a series of drawings that were on exhibition at the Whitney, and they have now been given to the National Gallery. And the title of the exhibition is The Nazi Drawings. It's a whole cycle of drawings done on brown paper with a 2B pencil, largely a 2B pencil. And I don't want to say this is the successor to Goya, because it doesn't look like Goya. But this is an instance of something that is very powerful in terms of statement. It really is. It's remarkable. But if you had no idea, what this guy was going on about in the work, the art is there. And that would take you to the other if you cared. And it'd be hard not to care because of the way that this was given. Something going on there, and you can see it. And it's hard to refuse this work on the basis of the subject matter alone, unless you don't care about how that's being given. It's very powerful. You can find this online. This is an Argentine who came to the United States young and was part of a very major print group, and then became a major, one of the leading printmakers ever. The name was Mauricio Lazansky. Now, I only know about him because I saw that exhibition. There's a great catalog for it, which is not something you want to leave on the coffee table necessarily. And I worked with him. I actually had the good fortune of having worked with him. And beyond that, this has nothing to do with what I'm saying about the achievement. The achievement is sealed. You can see it. It's public. He was responsible for the first solo show I ever had. So there's that going on. I know that. When I was a freshman at the University of Iowa, Lazansky came forward and said, this kid should be given a solo show. And the university raised the money through him to pay to get work from New York to Iowa and back again, long enough that I showed it on for several weeks. Yeah, that was an amazing thing. And the only comment I ever heard from him was, I knew nothing about printmaking, and they had this great print group out there, and all the MFA students who knew how to do everything. I didn't know how to do anything. And there I was with them, and I didn't know what to do. So I watched them, and he wasn't around much. People who taught art didn't have to be around all the time. They would come in and do whatever it was, and everything was fine. In fact, the person who taught after me at the Art Students League, Richard Pousset Dart, Richard used to sit in Studio 16 on a chair with his back to the lockers and read the newspaper. And if you had anything you wanted to discuss, you could go and sit and talk with him, and he loved that. He would sit and talk with me. Wei worked with him in the afternoon, and they had a lot of dialogue. I just listened to a lot of snoring. Anyway, so I noticed they were going to some room, and the room had a smell to it. So I went there, and I had a copper plate that I was able to buy at a good discount because I had a part-time job in an art supply store in Iowa City, which was very small, just several blocks for art people in Iowa at that time. And so I had a copper plate, and I followed them, and I noticed they were putting their copper plate in the stuff, and what was there was acid. And I had no knowledge of or understanding of what that, I just knew there was something called that. So I thought, they're doing this, I do it. So I did it. I put the copper plate into the acid, and I came back the following day like my MFA friends were doing, and I took the copper plate out of the acid bath, and I did what they did. And I printed it, and it was black. It was a black rectangle. And it was an amazing black rectangle. It was. And I did what they did. I tacked it onto the wall so it was possible to sit and look at it for a while. So I sat and looked at it for a while, and all the graduate students were all someplace else by that time. And in came Lazansky, and it was tremendous trepidation, and he came over, and I didn't know he was behind me, put one hand on my shoulder, and said, "That's great, Maestro, when is the next one?" And that was it. That was it. Other than whatever else he did for everybody, it was something else. But there was no how to do it. There wasn't any how to do it at all. And other than Stanley Hayter's Atelier 17, which was largely in Paris and a little bit in New York, that print group that he had going was extraordinary. And those people who were part of that print group, which I was only in for a short time, they were remarkable. They were. Even MoMA deigned to come out there and get their work from them and put up an exhibition of their work. That was the level that was at. Anyway, this is sort of dinosaur conversation. I understand that. Stephanie Cassidy, and I think it's reflected in these pieces. She asked, "At what age did you decide to become an artist?" She asked that question, and I don't know anything else really. You know, I've had other jobs from time to time to keep that going, but nothing more ever than a part-time job of some sort in an art store, so to keep it going. So I don't know. The only other thing I can think of is probably from around the age of 5. And if you go on the internet, Stephanie has a picture that somebody posted of this kid sitting in a rowboat. It's me. sitting in a rowboat with a watercolor paper, making a painting. You know, and it says, you know, there he is. He's age 9, and somebody, when you click those hearts and you can make it come. Somebody sent a message back. Isn't he cute? Yeah, there's a level of appreciation that's spectacular. And then another question that Stephanie asked, she's great. By the way, I think I may have mentioned to you, I'm not sure, when the Archives of American Art had the interview, Stephanie was in my studio, and over the course of, I think, 3 days, we spent 8.5 hours. This thing is 8.5 hours long. And it's absolutely amazing. I listened to it once, and I started in the morning and late in the afternoon, except we did break for lunch. We did do that. So anyway, she asked how my parents reacted when I mentioned to them about doing this, and I don't know when that happened. I don't think it ever really did happen. I just thought, yeah, I'm doing this, and this is terrific, and whenever anything else is. Whenever it's possible and necessary to push anything else aside, it's wonderful, it's a great thing. It's a refuge also from a lot of other stuff. So very early on, and I think I must have been around 5 years of age. I really don't know much else besides this. The only time that when there was any interruption at all was this country got itself into another one of its wars, and I wasn't, my orders were changed at the last moment, fortunately, as I was about to depart. I was pulled out, and I was informed at that time that I was being sent to another place to teach things. There was a sigh of relief that no one could hear. It was really something. But anyway, she also asked, is there any book about art that you cannot live without? Well, I don't know if I could have, but I suppose I could. I might not have. Everything might have been different. As an early teenager, I read Ernest Hemingway's "For Whom the Bell Tolls," and never got over it. I never recovered. To this day, I never recover. When people ask me about, well, you know, what about it? I say, just read the good parts. It's absolutely incredible. No wonder he did what he did, finally. Boy. Also, you know, what is the quality, what quality do I most admire in an artist? Well, there is such a thing, and I try, in order to get all this done, I try to have it happen. My answer was that it's a willingness to work for a lifetime, always, no matter what, and doing so. That can be very difficult. It really can. It can be, but it can also be enjoyable, and things can come out of that. In the course of my lifetime, I had 3 children, and they're fine, and they have been fine, and they somehow didn't know what it meant to be a teenager on their own, what it didn't mean, and there was a lot of Woodstock involved in all of that, which was interesting to me because I was around, you know, one of my very good friends through that whole thing was Dylan, and a lot of his very good friends sort of made that close to impossible. All that, and they were in and out of the house all the time. But I lost my wife, and I largely was responsible for raising. We had a wonderful time. It was just fun, and they're all of them. I'm very, very proud of them. One of them is the head of the Human Rights Department at Aalborg University in Denmark. Another one was a teacher of special children with special abilities in Connecticut, who's now been honored by very recently by the NAACP for her work. And the third one is head of the book cover design department at Simon Schuster. She's out and I had no trouble getting them through college because they put themselves through. You know, I said to them, you know, starting, you know, really young, you know, I can't do this. I just can't do it. But you're going to do this, you know, do whatever it is that you need to do so that somebody will understand that they need to be there. And somehow they did. They got it. So, in my view, I'm very spoiled. And I know that. Anyway, I was there. Now, about the paintings in this show, they have been and my work will forever be affected by by this question, which was, what's the best exhibition you ever attended? It also came from the archivist, the historian here. And, you know, I'm very clear about that. It was that moment I mentioned when I walked, without realizing it, into the basilica in Arezzo and saw the Della Francesca paintings. They affected everything forever. And I probably have more books of paintings by Della Francesca than any other artist. It's just absolutely incredible. And I'm very happy to have found out that an artist that I knew as a much older artist, he used to be very kind and have breakfast with me sometimes, was Phil Guston. And he was a favorite. Della Francesca was a favorite of Phil Guston's also. And so it's amazing. And also there were any number of artists that really, contemporary painters that really found that it was possible to convey all sorts of things and still have a painting at the end of the whole thing. This is a great thing. There's something else here that informs all of this. And it's very important. There was a question about, you know, what came out of art school? Well, art school for me largely was, first of all, I came out of a home that was very involved and supportive of the arts. Both parents. And the grandparents who were immigrants here. Maybe I should be outside somewhere. they just left it alone because their son and their daughter, fortunately they didn't bother them. it was such that, let's see, I'm running, I'm getting close. It was such that I had a father that went to the new school, and when he was at the new school, he studied with Yasuo Kuniyoshi when he was there. And when I went off to, when I was wanting to go off to some art class somewhere, he said, don't go to the new school because they have a curriculum. Go to the Art Students League, it's better, and study with Kuniyoshi. He's up there, work with him. He's great. So, I did go up there, but I didn't go up there, and I wasn't initially able to get into Kuniyoshi's class. He was not happy about having a kid in the class. He wasn't really happy about women being in his class either, unless he liked them. And then they were there. So I was in a class, the league didn't have classes for children and adults at that time. It was all, you went in wherever you went in. So I went into a class, it was with some sort of artist named Alice Murphy, who was a very nice person. And she had a way that she wanted people to draw, and then she didn't interfere. And the league at that time had a model. All this informs this. They had a model who was, she was huge. She must have weighed 500 pounds, this person. Her name was Susie. And she's a legend. And I think I'm the last person left on earth that made any drawings of Susie. But I was just at the time, I was only 12 years old. Now, when Susie got up on that stand, and she disrobed, and she sat down, and she started talking to herself about how she had had affairs with Hitler and Mussolini and so forth, and all that was going on, and I'm sitting there, I'm looking at this person. I had never seen anything like this before. It was my first glimpse of a nude woman. Susie. This is absolutely incredible. You know, I'm just wondering if that impacted my brain. So what she had people do was what's called outline drawing of some sort. You put your pen on the paper and you didn't look at the paper, just made believe your pencil point was on the model, and well, I'm putting pencil on the paper, I'm not looking at the paper, I'm looking at Susie's and making believe the pencil point is on Susie. I couldn't get done. It was just impossible to get done with that drawing. It was on and on and on. And she was talking and talking and talking. And there was no attempt to edit her or take her to human resources and say, this is the problem. This was just part of life. So that was okay, except that something was going on that I didn't know. Alice Murphy went and got hold of my sister, who was in the class as well, and asked her to step outside. And she told my sister, you know, I think you should speak to your parents. It may be that your brother, he may need glasses, or maybe it's something else, but he's staring. Well, that happened. When I got to the Kuniyoshi class, there was something that got said by him that for me was been unforgettable all my life. I was only like 15 years old when he said it to me. He didn't talk much to people at all. He sort of gave a command about something that he felt or thought, and then walked away. Well, that was okay with me, because I knew he was a great painter, great artist. I really respected him, and I hero worshiped him. And I had finished the last painting that I ever did at the Art Students League. It was called White Pictures. And I had put everything into it that I possibly could at that time, and then took it beyond that. There can't be anything that's problematic about this thing at all. Until he came in. And then he took me into an empty studio, and sat me down, didn't say anything, just sat there. He sat on a higher stool than I was sitting on his chair, of course. It kept control of the situation. And then we sat, which would seem like forever, waiting for him to say something. And then finally, he said, you know, if you continue to make paintings like that, you'll be dead by the time you're 30. Now, you know, when I do these, I think to myself, oh, now I made it. I made it, but you could change the time frame somehow. What about the next one? But there's that, and that comes up a lot from people who I'm working with up at the league. How do I know when I'm finished? You don't. You don't. If you've got art going on, it's that from the very beginning, from the time you very first chose piece of canvas or the kind of paint you're working with. The moment you made your first mark, you're beginning to relate one thing to another. And there's a point where if there's nothing further to discuss or talk about anything at all, if there's nothing left, then there are no questions left to deal with and no subsequent paintings. It's over. I never got over that. I figured it out on my own with the help of an artist that you may know named Marisol. She's a wood sculptor. She was in the room next to mine in the boarding house where we were. And we were really good friends. She was a wonderful person, and she knew I was very distressed. And she sat down with me and she talked about it with and she said, you know, you have to do two things. You have to figure this out somehow, or just give it up. You know, the hell with it. You made your last painting, go do something else. And that was a really amazing thing. So, you know, I realized, you know, this painting, it was a remarkable painting. We still have it hanging in our apartment. And, you know, I've had dealers come into my home, and when they see that painting, they ask, why can't you do more like that? That's really something. Okay, so, now, sometimes there's a question with respect to favorite color. I don't know. I know that I come back to certain colors. I come back to them and come back to them. Although I apparently been drawn to the possibilities of a lot of different colors and what can we do and how can you set them into different kinds of relationships with different kinds of materials. And I have noticed that there are two colors that for a while now I've come back to in a lot of the paintings. And whether I want to or not, I know that, you know, that's where a certain strength that I have is necessary, and to go there and find a new way to give it. One is red. There's not just a red, as you know. There's all kinds of things that mean red. Another one is blue, and the blue, I can't make that claim about. I keep thinking about the cloak on Queen of Sheba in Piero della Francesca's fresco at Arezzo. There's a blue there that has haunted me all my life, and I've tried to address it and honor it from that time to this, relentlessly. But any blues that you ever see in any of this work or any of my work anywhere is somehow he has been in my mind, and you know, I'm trying to banish it at all. It just, if there's any way I can possibly live up to it without forfeiting my identity completely, I'm for it. I've never seen anything quite like that. Any questions so far? Yes, please.
So I'm just curious about the smaller works.
Yes.
Do you work on one, you know, more than one at the same time? And do you have some that just come together, you know, and others you're like, oh, just curious about the process.
I like to be able to work on more than one at a time. I have to deal with myself about this. And I have tried. I somehow think, by thinking, I have figured out it would be better somehow if I were able to do that. So I have tried, and it never works out. Whether it's a small piece or it's a large piece, they take about the same amount of time. I'm puzzled by them in very similar ways. It doesn't seem to make any difference. It's just what happens. And I think part of the issue, smaller work, and vice versa, is adjusting to the changing scale. Getting this thing out. That's complicated. That really is. That took a long time to get to, and you know, still working at it. But I think it's very hard. I did one painting in my life in one day. Yeah, I haven't seen it since a week after that happened. Yeah, I didn't destroy it. It's someplace, and I don't know how I was able to do that. I really don't. I have no idea.
And do you get like a seed of an idea, like for one of these, like, you know, what kind of prompts? Is it something you've read, or a color, or, you know, I mean, obviously it's an idea or an instinct, but I just.
Well, there's literature and poetry, and there's also music. I have music on all the time in my studio, And I'm not only not an advocate of anything pop, even though Dylan and I got along together, we're good friends. And that helped make it possible. It's Mozart and Bach. And lately, just to remind myself that tomorrow is another day. Beethoven. so who?
Mahler.
Oh, Mahler. Well, yeah. There have been times. Mahler. When I think things can't get any more difficult, and then there it is, and there. Boy, if you could get through that, however he did, it's sometimes something. Yeah, I know. And it depends on who's conducting the orchestra. All of that. Well, yeah, there are a lot of anecdotes. There's a lot of anecdotes. The question, what drives the work? Is there a question, or are there questions that get asked that you're aware of at all, which requires thought? It requires thinking. It does. There's no way around it. I mean, somebody asked a question. So the question was, are there any questions that drive your work? And there's a single question. It's what if? Which is a problem out in the world. But in the studio, it's a different kind of problem. What if? And I think with this kind of work, or work that goes in this direction where the artist is willing to do whatever the work seems to need to require, whatever it is. I mean, if it requires a piece of wood, and the wood does the job of a piece of wood, does what the piece of wood is supposed to do, then there's no interest in trying to emulate what a piece of wood looks like, because it won't work as well as a piece of wood, so a piece of wood gets used. It is as simple as that, or as complex as that. The same thing with any of these other materials, whatever it takes. And again, until what happened in Northern Europe, which led to the acquisition of paintings and the ownership and the collecting of paintings, that this was never an issue. The paintings were parts of buildings, they were parts of cave walls, they were parts of all kinds of things, and they were also objects, all kinds of objects. So it's only that very narrow point in time when artists coming out of Western art schools primarily, and now for the last 30 or 40 years, out of the Far East also, where the idea is to try to do this other thing, which is, I don't know, crazy. But something called Western painting. I mean, imagine calling something Western painting. Imagine if the Art Students League had a class called Western painting. Can you imagine? You probably have to shut the place down. What is that? So anyway, there it is. And then there's another thing, and I like to think, hopefully, that it goes on in all of these pieces of work, and anything else that comes out of my studio, or doesn't come out of my studio. Either way. The view is this, when I try to figure it out, if I can. You get bored. And when that happens, you were never there before, unless you're involved with, where you come back as something else or something. I don't know anything about that, or not much. And as I understand it, you get bored. And there was nothing quite like you before. Not at all. Not at all. That's remarkable. Then in general, there's a huge effort on the part of well-meaning people to make it different. So that you're not very away from everything else that much. Not even, so that at least you're recognizable somehow. And so that becomes a struggle forever. Who am I? I'm them. But artists have this other problem. I'm not them. I'm me. So there is this issue of giving expression to your identity And that's a problem, because if you do that, if you're successful, if you're Rembrandt or Pollock or Rothko or whoever it may happen to be, somebody's going to say, I don't like it. And that means they don't like you either, because it's an expression of you and who you are. And people get tired of being told, I don't like you, I don't like you, I don't like you. And after a while, I don't know what you do. I have some idea what people do, but whatever it is, it's that being able to be willing to risk giving expression to how you identify in a way that you principally are responsible for. That comes from you. That part. I think that's the most difficult thing for a lot of artists. And sometimes when they succeed, they don't like what they see. And that, of course, means they don't like who they are. Something like that's going on. That turns into a whole big thing, and then they try to forget who they are. There must be some way of being somebody else or something else. So that happens, and the next thing you know, they're in the emergency room in Bellevue or in a coffin somewhere. I don't know. The hope I think that most artists have, most artists, is that somehow there are aspects of what they do that are sufficiently clear with respect to who did them, and taking ownership of that and risking whatever it may be that comes from that, whatever it may be, and that which can be a wide range of reactions and things that go on and happen. So then there was this additional question, which I think everybody's affected by, most people I know, that what is the best thing about art in the era of social media? Boy, personally, I don't really much care. However, this is an intervening variable now, and I can't even begin to imagine what's going to happen, where this is going to go. The people in general, and more people than ever, are looking at pictures of things, of something or another, on screens. And I've looked at these pieces on screens, and I almost don't know who did them. That is another universe, and it's becoming, for all sorts of practical reasons and reasons that sometimes generate excitement, one that's viable on a practical level. But I don't know. I really don't know where this is going, and I can't even imagine. Excuse me. But I think it has affected the art world. It's affected artists. It's affecting museums, a lot of public institutions, brick and mortar galleries. It's even affected online exhibitions and what gets done with them, and who's better at, what places are better at using online than other places and so forth. All of which have little or nothing to do with the virtue of what's hanging on the walls. They're really complicated. I don't know how this gets solved. And now that AI's into it, and there are artists who are supporting it like crazy, I can't even begin to imagine where this goes. I have a gut reaction, which is not good, but I don't know what the validity of that is. I'm not sure, because I know that there are artists that would never have exposure if it wasn't for that. So there is that, and sometimes it leads to exposure that wouldn't happen otherwise. Dealers used to come out of their galleries frequently to look at what they had heard about or thought they need to see. They tend to want to look at it first on the screen, sort of audition the work on the screen, and then come out. But that's also complicated because it turns into, oh, she's one of those. And that's really sort of uncomfortable. Now, I understand there may be a generational issue with this, but I don't believe it. I don't think it has anything to do with it. I'm still 5 years old. This doesn't go away. I was very lucky. Does anybody have any direct questions about the work? Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there a piece either in this collection, or if you prefer to go in search of your whole body of work, that frustrated you more than any others?
Yeah. actually. Well, it lent itself to continuing difficulties and changes and so forth. Yeah, there was one. It has not been noted. As a matter of fact, publicly, it's been held up as an example, some unbeknownst. It's the larger one in the middle of that wall, red, light blue one. To whom do we, no, I can't remember the title of that one, but whatever it is, that one. That was a complicated thing. I'm just not sure why, but it got complicated.
Something about it,
What?
just something about it.
In a sense, it's being fairly widely used in different places for different reasons as a lead up to. I actually don't know what's going on finally in that regard until a little bit later. I don't. That's a scary part. So what's going on? Well, I mean, what's very scary is if you have an opening and everything sells out right away. Then what happened? I mean, how ingratiating could everything possibly have been? It was that. So that, I don't know, but that I think more specifically than any other, I think there was one that had a great technical problem. That was this piece here. This piece of metal under here. There was a wonderful artist who lives in Germany now. She has a studio in Germany, who studied with me a while back. And she came to visit me a couple of years ago. And she brought with her that big black piece of metal. And it turns out that however she was able to do this, she had access to an effort on the part, I think it was the city of Dorfman, to restore Beethoven's study. This was there.
Wow.
So she got it, and she gave it to me as a gift. And I couldn't figure out what the hell to do with this thing, much less, it weighs a lot. It goes from Beethoven. So finally, when I started that piece, I thought, I don't know what the hell's going to go on with this piece of work. I'm going to use this. I'm going to use it. And before I did anything else, anything other than have the space in front of me, I fastened that in bolts. I made sure that it would be really hard to change my mind. and then went to work with it. But I have to tell you, there was one thing that was very difficult, one thing that was very painful, was bringing anything over the top. I felt like, oh God, this is this great thing.
Did you listen to Beethoven while you did it?
I don't remember, but I think that's entirely within the realm of possibility. Entirely. I know there are times in the morning, if I can't get started or for whatever reason, something like that, I will play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony as loud as I can without being evicted. To remind me, and also, that is also an inspiration because, there was a time when I was otherwise occupied, when the government had hold of me for a while, when I had damage done to my auditory brainstem in my left ear. And I don't hear well in my left ear. There was a big explosion. So I was a year ago, I think it was about a year ago, I was at an audiologist, and she was looking at this and looking at this and looking at this. She said, I don't know if we can do anything about that. And so, I knew that, but my insurance company, they wanted to make sure. So then I told her my theory, which she was not interested in. I don't think he was deaf. I think he just didn't want to listen. which is, believing that is a very sustaining thing. It really means a lot. Here's this guy. Wow, that's fantastic. You mean you can do that and still? Yeah. Anyway, are there any other questions? No. Boy, yes.
Do you have one singular painting you just love it? And you cannot part with it?
Yeah, I do.
Which one?
That's the one where Kuniyoshi said, if you do any more paintings like that, you'll be dead till your time of 30. And every time I look at that, I think, it's that one. I'll show you a picture of it sometime. I have good pictures of that. It's something we look at every morning upon waking. This exact thing. Still here. There's that blue in it, by the way. The Della Francesca blue is there.
Wow.
Well, at least a try.
Think you'd do anything differently if you were starting out today?
Well, I think that's a function of personality. Me, no. I'd be the same pain in the ass that I must have been. Well, I'll tell you how far that went. When I was accepted into a specialized high school for talented kids in New York City, and it was ridiculous because I had been to the Art Students League, and I knew that what was going on in this place was nonsense. So when Kuniyoshi and another artist teaching at the league saw what I was doing in that first year of high school, they said, "Get out of there. Go as quickly as you can." So I did. And I went to a regular high school, or regular New York City high school, where they had an art department. And the head of the art department, Stephanie, was a famous artist at the Art Students League. She had studied with this guy. His name was Robert Brackman. And she found out that I had been away at the Art Students League, this kid, working with Kuniyoshi. That was the end. That was absolutely the end. She failed me in art in high school. and that was okay. It wasn't okay with my mother, but anyway, what happened was New York State, fortunately at that time, had a New York State Board of Regents examination in art. Where you draw left hand, you draw right hand, you draw a corner of the room, you do this, you do that. And for me, that was no problem at all. It was just a matter of, look at what's there, and does it look like that or does it not look like that? That was the way this mind was working. So I did this thing and left. And I was sitting with, the paperwork said F. And I had this idea about maybe I'll go to college with a major in art. So all the tests went off from Albany to another bunch of people, different people, who were just looking under a microscope. I came out of there with a perfect 99. She had to pass me. She did, and she passed me by 1 point. Instead of failing grade, I was 1 point over. I'm very happy about it, very proud of it, because I thought she was a moron, respectfully. and about her mentor, I can't even imagine. I mean, the league features guys like that when they want to get people into the school who want to be able to. But it's an easy thing to do, actually, really. But anyway, yeah, there's those things. But there have always been those things. It's a function of personality. I think it has a lot to do with it. I think so. But I don't know how that happened. I don't know what causes that. I know there was some enabling. You guys have a very supportive household who also said, think about this, but you're responsible. There was always that you're responsible added to it. But it was a very supportive household, and they had huge aspirations in terms of what they thought was wonderful, and so on. If I hadn't done this, there were two other options. I love playing baseball, and as a kid, the Brooklyn Dodgers existed. I was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and I wanted to pitch for the Brooklyn Dodgers. That was one of the things. Yeah, and the other possibility was I was very good with motorized two-wheelers. And I had a variety of such until fairly recently. I don't know, until maybe 15 years ago or something. It was a big accident. And that was sort of the end of it. And I sold the vehicle to my dealer, which is a fantastic thing. I've spoken to that man since. He doesn't say anything about it at all. Nothing. So there's something about, you know, what's going on. That's it. My guess is, see, I don't believe in talent. I don't think there's any such thing as talent. I think that's too easy an explanation for everything. Some sort of talent. I think we live in a world, and I think that has a lot to do with what happens to each other. There's that. I have a T-shirt that has a picture of a cat, and it says, "My cat is a communist." This just goes on and on. So that's sort of. I am concerned about wearing it on the subway. So, are there any other really? It's terrific. Really enjoying it. Anything? No questions? No, really? Oh.
Do you have a favorite shape? Favorite shape? Favorite shape?
Yeah, I think so. It's something that might start out almost straight and then not stay straight. Yeah, I have a problem with there's a straight line. I have problems with that. If there's a straight line, there's got to be something that plays against that in some way. There's also, this show doesn't have it in the large work, but a lot of the work that I've done, there are no perimeters that have straight edges. That's also very interesting because when some museum comes along and they want something, what are we going to do with this when we take it out of the box? What do we do? But I have these things that come down, and my invention. It's proprietary.